Okay, if we're looking at chapter 9, this is all plant growth and development. This one's a little bit longer. It might take 2 videos to get through the entire thing. Because if you look at this, you're going to be able to identify stages and products of photosynthesis, discuss the function of respiration and recognize the steps, describe the process of transpiration and the effects of different environmental conditions, recall the movement of solutes through the plant. You're also going to be able to identify processes of plant reproduction, describe the basic plant breeding principles and reasons plant breeding is important, and describe the careers for plant physiologists and plant breeders. All right, so photosynthesis, this is not anything new to you guys. You guys have studied this from early elementary science classes. The whole idea of photosynthesis is the plant being able to do something super cool that we can't do, which is capture the sun's energy and make it into food. So obviously it takes carbon dioxide and water to carbohydrate molecules. It's used for energy and the building blocks of other molecules. If you look at it, there are 2 reactants. There's carbon dioxide from the air enters through the stomata. And stomata we haven't talked much about yet, but it's the little pores on the leaves. And we'll get into those parts too. So the water travels through the leaf, through the xylem. And if you look at this image that they have here, basically they took the leaf of a plant, they exploded it apart for you. They're showing you the plant material, and they have basically what's going on in the whole process. And when you see epidermis, it's just like us. That's the outer layer of the leaf. They're showing you all those components inside. So photosynthesis, again, oxygen is a byproduct. That's why we have such a great relationship with plants. They give us oxygen, and that's an awesome relationship that we have. If you look at the chemical reaction, no, I'm not going to make you memorize this, but this is showing you basically the chemical formula for the process of photosynthesis. So if you look at this image, they have basically taken the chloroplast and other plastids. They're just kind of blowing it up to show you how they kind of stack like this. They're typically green. There are some plants that kind of go against the green and are not green on the outside, but on the inside they will have these green components, even though we can't see them. They have chlorophyll, thylakoid, grana, and stroma. So the chlorophyll pigment, basically it captures the light energy. The thylakoid, those are the disc-shaped sacs in which chlorophyll is found. The grana, the thylakoid arranged in stacks called grana. And then stroma is the aqueous spaces outside the grana. All right, so this is showing you the amount of light absorbed and then the wavelength of light. And as you look, they talk about chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B on this. Chlorophyll A is basically the principal pigment responsible for capturing light energy. And then chlorophyll B is accessory carotenoid pigments that extend the range for capturing. All right, photosynthesis itself, it's a light-dependent reaction, response to light energy being absorbed by chlorophyll, light energy converted to chemical energy. So basically it's making sugar, and that occurs in the grana. And that's just showing you in the diagram here what it all looks like. There's a whole outer membrane to this. That's showing you a grana where it's all stacked here, and that's where that process is actually happening. All right, so this is another one too that you should have learned. You maybe don't remember. It's one of those things that we kind of learn and then move on from. This is the Calvin cycle. So there's a whole process of carbon fixation. Carbon atoms from carbon dioxide are used to make organic compounds in which chemical energy is stored, and this occurs in that Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle itself produces a sugar molecule called glucose through a series of chemical reactions assisted by enzymes. This one is talking about the CRASSULACAN acid metabolism, also known as CAM. It's alternative photosynthetic mechanisms, succulents, those plants, and I love succulents. You'll find that out later if you don't already know that about me. But they attach a molecule of carbon dioxide to a 3-carbon molecule, but they open their stomata at night to minimize water loss. If you have a cactus, maybe had one, or a succulent, you know you don't have to water them very often. Some other plants like that would be pineapples, Spanish moss. There's some orchids like that too that are pretty well at conserving water loss. These are C4 plants. C4 plants are kind of unique too. If you notice, they're tropical grasses. They thrive in high light tropical conditions. Their big claim to fame is basically the fact that the C4 plants have molecules that are moved to where they can be used most efficiently, which allows C4 plants to minimize water loss. And their stomata are basically closed more than C3 plants. So those that they have on the list would be maize, millet, sorghum, switchgrass, and sugarcane, all tropical plants. And they can really do well in dry conditions too. Respiration. Respiration is going to occur in the mitochondria. They also talk about ATP production. So if you look at that whole process, respiration is basically the process in which glucose, the product of photosynthesis, combines with oxygen to produce energy in a form that can be used by plants. So this is kind of walking you through that whole idea of how this comes together. And then we have ATP production. So this is talking about glycolysis. It yields 2 pyruvates, and that occurs in the cytoplasm. So ATP production, to make ATP, a glucose molecule is split into 2 molecules of pyruvate through glycolysis. And like I said, that occurs in the cytoplasm. The pyruvate then moves into another series of reactions with mitochondria called the Krebs cycle, which presence of oxygen produces more ATP. Then transpiration. So some of this you might be thinking, what in the world? Well, if you think about the whole process of photosynthesis, if plants aren't doing that, they're not making their own food. They're not being self-sufficient. They're not doing the things we need them to do to create food and oxygen. So we need to do what we can to keep plants healthy. And this is basically us learning how to care for them. Seems complicated in this form, but it's really not when you boil it down. So transpiration, think about the fact that obviously we need these plants to absorb water. This is talking about transpiration is basically the stomata open and water vapor is released. Water is pulled through the plant as adjoining water molecules exit the stomata through evaporation. Roots take in water as a liquid through the process of diffusion. Then water is drawn upward through the xylem cells and released into the air in a gaseous state. So, for example, if we were to be in the greenhouse and it gets really warm in there, the plants are going to, they're going to dry out faster because of the heat in that room. You'll also notice, though, it's typically pretty humid in there just because of the water loss for the plants. So it's and it's gonna speed up that whole process with the heat. And if you look at too, it's got these images on this slide where if you look at number 1, we'll start at the beginning with number 1. That's water's passively transported into the roots and then into the xylem. That's what it's showing you here. It's a blown up vision or view of the roots. Number 2, the forces of cohesion and adhesion cause the water molecules to form a column in the xylem. And then 3, water moves from the xylem into the mesophyll cells and evaporates from their surfaces and leaves the plant by diffusion through the stomata. All right. Carbon dioxide entry, it's basically needed for photosynthesis. So you may have heard someone tell you that if you talk to your plants or sing to your plants that they'll grow better. Really, you're just releasing carbon dioxide around them, and that is benefiting the plant. That can enter through the stomata and leads to evapotranspiration. Transpiration itself, they're talking about water uptake and nutrient access, and they call that, if you look at, they're basically showing a plant wilting And then basically when you water it, you're filling all of those spaces in the plant. It's going to absorb all of that water, and it's going to basically create that, what they call turgor. It's just the water pressure in the plant providing rigidity and support. It's basically going to make it stand upright and do much better. Because if it's in this wilted condition, it's much easier for pests to get at it. And since it's kind of like a weakened immune system, the pests can attack it much more easily. All right, factors affecting transpiration. This is kind of common sense stuff here, but you have relative humidity, temperature, plant structures, water, and wind. Kind of common sense. Too much or too little could also be an issue. Wind, if it's a really windy area, if it's a plant outside, it could dry out very quickly. Temperature, high temperatures will increase the rate of transpiration. And then relative humidity, if it's really humid out, the plant's not going to lose water as fast, even if it is warm outside. Movement of solutes. Active uptake of inorganic nutrients. This is like fertilizer absorption. It could be just even natural elements in the soil that the plant needs that are feeding it. That's going to happen through this process. Then it talks about that Casparian strip. It's showing you that in the red here in this blown up image. It's also that red circle on the smaller image. That's basically a waxy barrier at the edge of the endodermis. And water nor ions can pass through that layer without going through the plasma membrane. All right. So translocation of sugars through the phloem. Sugars travel to an area, or two areas needing energy. It's basically movement of sugar within the plant. So when you look at this, you have raspberries on here, and we hope that they're sweet. Part of the problem, if you've ever had a really bitter raspberry, one, it may not have been ripened yet. Number two, it might not have had enough sugar movement throughout the plant, because that's actually what makes it sweet too. And then, so when it says sources here in sinks, sources are where sugar is produced or stored in the plant, and sinks are where sugar is used in the plant. And then reproduction. We've done a lot with plant reproduction. It's, been mostly for the good. A lot of it has been to try to get more yields out of our plants. That's why it says higher yields. We want to get more out of one plant, because one of the issues that we face in agriculture is feeding an ever-growing population, and we're asking farmers to feed more and more people with less acreage. And then if you look, they have disease and pest resistance. If I can grow a plant that can tolerate a pest and I don't have to put more pesticide on it, I'm saving money and limiting exposure to people to pesticides. Improved vigor would be a plant kind of holding up to maybe environmental conditions, maybe not, if somebody's not watering it regularly like they should be, it can withstand those things. For some of our like vegetables, crop plants, increased nutritional content, we've always worked to try to make our plants better for all of us. Some ornamental things, if you look here, this is a leaf of a geranium. There's some that have different patterns on them, so when they're not blooming, they even look pretty. That's something that we've done through breeding just to make things look good. We've also done some stuff with, if you notice, they have enhanced stress tolerance. So, maybe they can handle more heat. Maybe they can handle more cold. That's the stress that plants are going to face. And then post-harvest longevity. If you think about a flower, if I'm going to cut a flower, maybe it's a rose, and I'm going to sell it in a floral shop. I want that rose to last as long as possible because I'm going to get more money out of it that way. That's what that post-harvest longevity is. So this was part 1 of the chapter 9, plant growth and development. Look for part 2. It won't be quite as long, but it's going to go through the mitosis and meiosis, and we'll continue with that in the second video.